The wedding hall was draped in soft lights and white roses, but William stood outside, unmoved, staring at the closed doors like they held a burden he wasn't ready to face. Inside, guests whispered. Where was the father of the bride? The man who had once ruled over skyscrapers couldn't even walk his own daughter down the aisle. 3 days earlier, William had found a letter under his office door. The handwriting stopped him cold. Delicate, familiar, unmistakably hers. Lily. He didn't open it right away. He'd told himself years ago he had no daughter. That the girl who left him behind no longer existed. But that night, something compelled him. A glass of scotch, the silence of the penthouse. And the envelope, still sealed. It wasn't long. Just a page. Dear Dad, it began. I'm getting married. I wish you could be there. I wish a lot of things. She asked only one thing, not his approval, not money. Just a walk. A single walk, down one aisle. Not as a billionaire, but as her father. The words shook him more than he wanted to admit. He folded the letter, placed it in the drawer, and locked it, like he always did with pain. Now, on the wedding day, William stood at the edge of the ceremony, invisible to most, a storm of emotions behind his still expression. He told himself he came out of curiosity. But truth whispered otherwise. He wanted to see her. To know if she still looked like the girl he once held. The doors opened. Gasps echoed. There she was, Lily, radiant and calm, walking alone. No one by her side. A bride missing her father. Her eyes scanned the crowd, just briefly. Did she see him? Did she know he came? He stepped back, as if her glance might burn. Ethan waited at the altar. Young, poor, nothing like the life William had built. Yet the way he looked at her, it unsettled him. The music was about to begin. A hush fell. Then, the first note sounded, soft, familiar, aching. A lullaby on strings. William froze. That melody. It was his. A tune he'd hummed when rocking Lily to sleep, before the world hardened him. The notes carried him back, tiny hands gripping his finger, a giggle in the night, a promise whispered to a newborn. He blinked rapidly, throat tight. No one else knew what the music meant. But she did. She remembered. She had chosen that song for him. Sunlight filtered through the curtains as Lily sat on the edge of her bed, the wedding dress hanging quietly across the room. She traced the lace with her eyes, heart knotted. This was supposed to be the happiest morning of her life, yet something felt undeniably missing. It wasn't nerves about marriage. It was the absence of a man who should have been there, her father, William, who hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. She could still picture his cold expression the night she left home at 18, suitcases packed, voice shaking. He hadn't tried to stop her. He had been a different man before her mother's death, warm, attentive, humming lullabies late into the night. But grief hardened him. Business became his refuge. Affection vanished, replaced by silence and distance. And that silence had followed her into this day. Downstairs, Ethan was making breakfast for the guests who'd arrived early. He was everything her father wasn't, gentle, patient, present. She'd fallen in love with him because he listened, because he saw her in ways her father never had. Yet she couldn't stop wondering how different this morning might have felt if William had simply replied to her letter. One word would have been enough. Margaret arrived holding a box wrapped in blue satin. Your mother's, she said softly. Inside lay a delicate pearl hairpin, worn by generations of women in their family. Lily held it like treasure. She would be proud, Margaret added. And you think he would be too? Lily asked without looking up. Margaret hesitated, then simply said, I think he wants to be, but he's forgotten how. As the hairstylist gently pinned the curls of her long chestnut hair, Lily stared at her reflection. She looked like a bride, yes, but she felt more like a child playing dress-up. The white gown didn't erase the ache in her chest, or the unanswered questions she carried for years. She thought of the time she had waited by the door as a little girl, hoping he'd come home early. Most nights, he didn't. The scent of lavender drifted in from the garden. Ethan knocked once before entering. You look unbelievable, he said, eyes wide. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Nervous? He asked. Not about you, she said honestly. He knelt beside her, taking her hand. I know he hurt you. But you're stronger now. You built this life. We did. And I'll stand with you, even if he never shows. The makeup artist added a touch of rose to her cheeks. Someone offered champagne, but she waved it off. Her heart wasn't in celebration mode, it was in survival mode. She'd imagined this day countless times, always hoping for a reconciliation. And now, hours away, she felt the finality settling in. Maybe her letter had gone unread. Maybe her voice had never truly reached him at all. Back in her room, she opened her journal and reread the copy of the letter she'd sent. "I'm not asking you to approve. Just to walk with me. Once." It had taken her 2 weeks to write those lines. She'd folded it with shaking hands. The courage it had taken to reach out to him, only to be met with silence, felt like rejection all over again. But still, she left the door open. Just in case. Margaret returned, checking in on final details. "Guests are arriving. The florist brought extra lilies," she smiled. "You always loved those." Lily nodded, adjusting her earrings. "Thank you for being here," she said. Margaret gently touched her arm. "Of course I'm here. I promised your mother I'd always look after you." There was a pause. "Even when your father can't, or won't." Lily stepped onto the porch to breathe. The garden was blooming. Children played near the fountain, unaware of adult wounds. She watched them, remembering a time when life felt whole. When laughter filled the house and her father's arms were home. A single tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by the world. She wiped it quickly. There wasn't time for grief, not today. Back inside, the dress was waiting. Lily stepped into it slowly, carefully, as if slipping into a memory. The fabric hugged her like a whisper from the past. Helpers zipped the back, adjusted the veil. She stood tall, not for the guests or the pictures, but for herself. She had come this far without him. She would keep walking. And if he never answered, at least she had tried. As final preparations unfolded, Lily sat alone for a moment of stillness. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Mom, if you're watching, help me be brave." A breeze passed through the window, rustling the curtains like an unseen hand. She didn't believe in signs, but in that moment, she let herself believe anyway. She rose, steady now, ready to face the altar. With or without him, Ethan leaned against the sink, his reflection flickering in the microwave door as morning light flooded the kitchen. The scent of fresh bread filled the house, but he barely noticed. Guests were beginning to arrive, and today was his wedding day. He should have felt joy. Instead, his gut twisted with dread. He had a secret, one he hadn't found the courage to tell Lily. One that had kept him awake for weeks. He'd lost his job 32 days ago. The board at the music school had slashed half the staff without notice. Budget restructuring, they said. But that meant nothing when he walked out with a cardboard box and no severance. He kept it from Lily, not because he wanted to lie, but because she looked so happy. She deserved one perfect week before their lives changed. He thought he could fix it in time. He tried. Dozens of applications, phone calls, follow-ups that led nowhere. His savings shrank daily. He canceled his gym membership, stopped buying coffee, even skipped meals. Yet each night, when Lily spoke about their honeymoon plans, her voice glowing with hope, he smiled and nodded like nothing was wrong. Shame burned beneath every word he didn't say. It hollowed him out slowly, silently. He feared not just her disappointment, but what it would confirm. That he wasn't enough. That maybe her father, William, had been right, that a poor music teacher had no business marrying his daughter. Ethan had always believed love mattered more than wealth, but lately, that belief felt naive. Love couldn't pay rent. Love didn't cover medical insurance. Love didn't stop eviction notices. The morning bustle continued around him, distant laughter, clinking glasses, the soft notes of a cello warming up in the ceremony room. He walked out to the porch, needing air, but the guilt followed. He sat on the wooden steps, watching birds land on the garden fence. It was peaceful here. He thought of the day he'd proposed under the big oak tree. That was the last time he'd felt certain of anything. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Another message from the landlord. Second notice. He deleted it, heart pounding. The suit he'd wear later had been borrowed from Margaret's late husband. The shoes were second-hand. And the ring on Lily's finger? A family heirloom. Nothing he gave her was truly his. That thought clawed at him. He felt like a fraud dressed as a groom. And the clock was ticking. Ethan wandered back inside, the soft hum of conversation muffled behind walls. He passed the parlor and paused beside the old piano, mahogany, polished, slightly out of tune. He hadn't touched a key in weeks. Music used to be his voice, his comfort, his armor. Now it was a mirror reflecting everything he couldn't say. He sat, hesitated, then let his fingers fall into a melody. Low, trembling, his own kind of confession. The notes floated gently through the hall, unnoticed by most. But to Ethan, each chord was loaded with the weight of unsaid truths. He didn't know if it was a lullaby or a plea, but it was honest. His eyes closed as his body swayed with the rhythm. If he couldn't say it, maybe she'd hear it in this. In the pauses. In the aching progression of unresolved chords. In the sound of someone trying not to fall apart. When the last note faded, Margaret appeared quietly in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You always were better with keys than words," she said softly. Ethan looked up, startled. "Is there something you're not telling her?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "She deserves the truth," she continued. "But she also deserves a man who can carry both honesty and fear in the same hand." He leaned back on the bench, the wood creaking beneath him. "I didn't mean to lie," he whispered. "I just didn't want to disappoint her." Margaret stepped closer. "Disappointment is temporary. Deception lingers." She wasn't cruel. Just clear. Her eyes held something deeper, empathy shaped by her own disappointments. "If you're going to build a life together," she said, "don't start it on silence." Later, alone in the guest room, he wrote her a note. Nothing long. Just a few lines in his slanted handwriting. "I lost my job. I didn't tell you because I was scared. But I believe in us." He stared at it, unsure if he'd give it to her. But writing it felt like taking a breath after days underwater. He folded the paper and slid it into his jacket pocket. He didn't know when. But soon. She'd know. Outside the window, laughter rose from the garden. Lily's laughter. Bright, unguarded, filled with light. He closed his eyes and let it fill him. She was his reason. Not her approval. Not her forgiveness. Just her. Her strength, her joy, her fight for beauty even in broken places. He stood up slowly, breathing deep. He wasn't the man he wanted to be yet. But he would become him, for her. The night before the wedding, William sat alone in his penthouse office, city lights flickering like stars on concrete. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, but didn't drink. On his desk lay the letter, creased, unfolded, and read too many times. He told himself he wasn't going. That her choice had already spoken volumes. But something in her words, "just walk with me," refused to quiet inside him. He had reread that one line dozens of times. Not a plea for approval. Not a demand for forgiveness. Just a walk. One symbolic gesture of fatherhood. And still, he hadn't replied. Couldn't. The years between them were filled with silence, regrets, and choices he couldn't undo. The man she once called daddy had long ago vanished behind contracts, mergers, and walls too high for even love to climb. Margaret had called twice that day, and he hadn't answered. She'd left a message, "You'll regret it if you don't come. Even if you think she won't care, she does." He hated how well she knew him. Hated how her voice pierced through his armor. He poured another drink, then stopped halfway. Something deeper than guilt was gnawing at him. Something closer to grief, and maybe shame. He walked to the hallway where an old family portrait hung. There they were, Lily, 6 years old, grinning with a missing front tooth, his late wife's eyes bright with quiet strength. And him, younger, smiling like he still believed life would always make sense. He touched the frame and felt a sudden tightness in his chest. That version of him was dead. But maybe, just maybe, not buried yet. In the guest room down the hall, a suitcase sat open. He'd packed it that morning, without knowing why. A dark suit. Shoes shined. Cufflinks he hadn't worn in years. As if part of him had already decided before his mind caught up. He looked at his watch. Midnight. The wedding would begin in less than 16 hours. If he left by morning, he could be there unseen, unnoticed, just to watch. He tried to sleep but couldn't. The silence in the room was too loud. Memories bled through the walls, Lily's laugh echoing down the stairs, her tiny arms around his neck, the way she used to hum while drawing at the kitchen table. He remembered a song he'd written for her once, a lullaby she insisted he sing every night. He hadn't thought of that melody in years. Until her letter arrived. He got out of bed, opened the drawer of his nightstand, and pulled out a yellowing notebook. Inside were lyrics and unfinished melodies. Scribbles from a younger, gentler version of himself. He turned pages until he found it, Lily's song. 4 simple lines. Soft chords. And beneath them, a note written by her in shaky handwriting, "Don't forget this, Daddy." His hands trembled as he traced the ink. The next morning, Margaret stood in the doorway of his home, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're not dressed," she said flatly. "That's because I'm not going," he replied. She didn't move. You read the letter? He nodded. And? And it changes nothing. She stepped closer. No, it changes everything. She asked for you, William. Not your money. Not your name. Just you. He turned away, jaw tight. She chose a life beneath her, he muttered. She chose peace, Margaret corrected. And a man who treats her with care. Isn't that what any father should want? He didn't answer. She sighed, softer now. You may never be able to undo the past. But you still get to decide who you are today. Even showing up in the back row means something. Even silence has presence. He sat on the edge of the bed, suit jacket folded beside him. What if she doesn't want me there? He asked. Margaret sat beside him. Then you'll know. But if you don't go, you'll never know whether there was a moment, just one, when she looked for you in that crowd. Her voice broke slightly. Do you really want that kind of silence echoing for the rest of your life? William stared at the floor, the weight of his choices pressing down. Pride had built him an empire. But it had also left him alone. Maybe just showing up, no speeches, no gestures, was enough. Maybe it was a start. A tremor in his chest grew. He stood, walked to the closet, pulled out the jacket, and began dressing. His hands moved with purpose. His heart, cautiously, followed. As he stepped into the car, the city was still waking. The sky was pale blue, soft with morning hush. The driver didn't ask questions. Take me to the address, William said, handing over the invitation he'd once ignored. He watched the skyline fade behind him in the rear-view mirror. He didn't know if he would speak. He didn't know if she'd see him. He just knew he had to be there. The sun had settled high above the garden, casting soft shadows across the rows of white chairs neatly arranged in front of the floral arch. Guests spoke in low voices, their expressions blending anticipation and reverence. In the farthest corner of the venue, behind a line of old oak trees, William stood hidden. He hadn't meant to get this close. He told himself he would stay in the car. But the music drew him closer. The place he never planned to return to now held the daughter he wasn't sure he deserved to see. Inside the bridal suite, Lily stood in silence near the mirror. She had already fixed her veil. Her dress fell in perfect lines. Her bouquet rested on a nearby chair. She wasn't touching anything, not even her own reflection. Her lips were slightly parted, her breath shallow. Around her, the room was quiet but full of invisible weight. Footsteps moved distantly down the hall, doors closed and opened. But her world had narrowed to the feeling of being alone on the edge of something irreversible. Ethan stood quietly near the altar, his hands clasped together in front of him. His eyes scanned the garden once more before resting on the musicians seated to the side. He had memorized the faces of every person here, except one. And though he smiled politely when someone nodded toward him, his mind was with Lily. He wasn't worried she wouldn't come. He was worried about the part of her that still hurt and that he couldn't fix. Behind the guests, the quartet began tuning. The first chords floated out softly, almost like a memory searching for its owner. The violinist turned a page and gently adjusted the sheet music titled Lily's Song. It was handwritten. No official title, no credits. Just notes sketched in quiet ink, a melody nearly forgotten until today. The bow lifted. The opening note rang clear. And from the woods, William froze. The sound hit him like wind against a sealed door. His shoulders locked. His hands curled slightly. That song, he had written it without knowing, years ago, in a dark nursery with a baby on his chest. He hadn't played it in decades. Not since the days when he still had someone who called him Dad without hesitation. The music filled the space between trees and people, and he stayed exactly where he was, like if he moved, it would vanish. Back inside, Lily heard it too. Her eyes closed. The room suddenly felt too full, then too small. Her bouquet sat untouched. The notes came through the open window like ghosts, kind, aching ghosts. She had chosen the song not to manipulate, but because it was the only piece of him she could carry without bitterness. And now it was here, alive again, echoing between them like a prayer she hadn't meant to send. In the garden, heads turned subtly as the music continued. Guests glanced at each other, recognizing something intimate about the melody. Ethan looked up sharply, startled by its familiarity. He had heard it once, hummed, not played, years ago, in Lily's kitchen. She didn't say what it was. Only that it helped her sleep when nothing else could. Now it surrounded them, binding silence and memory in one fragile loop. William leaned his weight slightly against the nearest tree. The bark scratched his palm, but he didn't move. He could see parts of the ceremony through gaps in the branches, flashes of white, petals, people standing. But all he saw was her, even if she hadn't appeared yet. His daughter. His music. His failure. He didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside him began to tremble, like the first loose brick in a wall long thought permanent. Margaret, seated in the front row, folded her hands in her lap and listened. She knew this song. She had heard it late at night when her sister rocked a baby to sleep. She didn't need to turn around to know he was here. She could feel it. Maybe it was the shift in the air, or the way the wind moved different through the trees. But something had changed. Something unspoken, and still too small to claim. Lily touched the edge of the veil near her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, not from calm, but from focus. There was a voice in her head that sounded like her mother. Even when you walk alone, you are never alone. She opened her eyes. She hadn't yet stepped into view. The door remained closed. The aisle untouched. But the song wrapped around her like a shawl. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel cold. The music reached its center, its original phrase repeating softly now with layered harmony. Every guest listened, even the children fidgeting in their chairs had gone still. And still, there was no bride. Only anticipation. Only music. William lowered his gaze, unable to look anymore. He hadn't known that a sound could reopen wounds so deeply. But here he was, on the edge of her life again, unable to move forward, unable to go back. A breeze moved through the garden, catching petals midair. The music softened into its final measures. And still, William did not step forward. He remained beneath the tree, unseeing. The song had said everything he couldn't. It had cracked open something old. But it had not yet moved his feet. That moment would come. But not here. Not yet. For now, he remained a father hidden in shadow, waiting for the courage to walk into the light. The last note of the song lingered in the air like dust catching sunlight. William hadn't moved. Not an inch. His shoulders had slumped slightly, his hands now loose at his sides. Around him, the world seemed far away, the rustle of trees, the hush of guests, even the music itself felt like it was behind glass. His throat ached, but he didn't speak. He was a man holding 1,000 things all at once, and none of them fit inside the chest that held them. A memory flickered, almost uninvited. Lily, no older than 5, dancing in socks on a hardwood floor. Her laughter echoing. His wife, watching from the doorway, her arms folded, her smile real. It had been an ordinary Sunday. No arguments. No distance. Just a moment when everything was still whole. He hadn't thought of that day in years. It came back now, with such clarity it hurt. Like a film reel unspooling all at once. He remembered his wife's voice that night, as she leaned against him in bed. Don't miss too many of these. He had chuckled, kissed her hair, and said, how could I? He hadn't known, then, that he would. That work and grief and silence would build a wall so high that not even music could climb it. Until now. Until today. Until this song reminded him of the man he used to be, and the father he never became. From his hidden place in the trees, William leaned back slightly against the trunk, eyes closed. His chest rose and fell with deep, uneven breaths. Inside him, everything was shaking loose, anger, guilt, love, fear. He wasn't ready to face her. But not facing her felt worse now. Like cowardice. Like betrayal. The song hadn't broken him. It had opened him. And now, every moment he remained still felt like a decision to keep failing. He imagined her just behind that door, the veil adjusted, bouquet in hand. Not walking yet. Still waiting. Maybe hoping. Maybe not. Maybe she had given up years ago. But he hadn't stopped being her father, even when he had disappeared. The ache in his chest was deep, ancient, made of missed birthdays and unopened letters. He placed a hand over his heart without thinking, like trying to hold something together before it broke. A breeze carried a sound, a soft laugh from the crowd, or maybe a sigh. It didn't matter. It pulled him back into the present. William opened his eyes and looked toward the path. Still no movement. No music. Just waiting. Everyone was waiting. For her. And in some buried place inside him, he realized, so was he. He wasn't here for tradition. He was here for the chance to be something again. Even if it was too late. His legs felt heavy, not from age but from hesitation. How do you walk into a moment you've spent a lifetime avoiding? How do you earn the right to stand beside someone you hurt so deeply? He didn't know the answers. He wasn't even sure they existed. But in the silence that followed the song, something in him began to shift, slowly, but unmistakably. Like the ground beneath him was nudging him forward. A flash of his daughter as a newborn came to mind, tiny, swaddled, crying with a voice that had startled him with its strength. He had held her close, unsure, terrified. His wife had smiled at him across the room. "You're doing fine," she had said. He hadn't believed her. But she had. That memory clung to him now like warmth in the cold. She had believed in him. Even when he had stopped believing in himself, he took one step forward. Then stopped. Not onto the aisle. Just away from the tree. A test. The world didn't shatter. No one saw him. But the act of moving, just a little, felt monumental. It wasn't time yet. He knew that. She hadn't appeared. The ceremony hadn't begun. But something in him had. A motion that couldn't be undone, a question that no longer wanted silence for an answer. Far off, the musicians began adjusting their instruments again. The quiet returned. Conversations in the distance started to rise, gentle, muted. The world was breathing again. But William stood in a pause between past and future. He wasn't who he had been, not quite. But he wasn't yet who he needed to become. And the space between those selves was where he waited now, trembling, ready, not yet moving. He thought of what he might say if he had the chance. "I'm sorry felt too small. I failed you felt too heavy. Nothing fit." But maybe the words weren't the point. Maybe showing up was the start. Not with speeches, not with tears, but with presence. She deserved more than a memory of him. She deserved to see him standing there. Not as the man he was, but as the one trying to return. A new hush began to settle over the guests. Movement near the back of the house. A door creaked open. The officiant stepped forward. The ceremony was about to begin. And William, now just inches out of the shadows, watched it unfold. His heart pounded. His feet stayed rooted. But something in his face had changed. The decision had not yet become action. But the will. The will was already there. The guests rose to their feet. The hush returned. At the back of the garden, a door creaked open slowly. Lily appeared in the doorway, bouquet in hand, veil cascading over her shoulders. She paused, not from nerves, but from weight. The kind of weight only silence can press into your spine. Everyone watched. Everyone waited. But for a heartbeat, she didn't move. And somewhere beneath the trees, William did. He stepped forward. One foot, then the other. Not fast. Not certain. But forward. The sun caught the side of his face, revealing the edges of age and the depth of something far older than years, regret. His shoes crunched softly on gravel. Heads turned. Whispers rose like waves. "Is that? It's him." He came. He didn't hear them. Or if he did, he didn't care. His eyes were only on her. Lily felt the air shift before she saw him. The sudden hush of whispers. The breeze that carried 100 unsaid things. She looked up, and there he was, walking slowly into view. Her breath caught. The world narrowed. The garden, the guests, the music, all faded. Only the man she hadn't seen in years remained. And between them, the space that pain had carved. And something else, a question. Ethan, standing at the altar, watched carefully. His brow furrowed, not with anger, but with hope held so tightly it hurt. He caught Lily's eye, gave her a single, quiet nod. No pressure. No expectation. Just permission. She turned back toward William, whose steps had stopped just feet away. He didn't speak. He didn't dare. But his hand lifted, slow, trembling, open. Time didn't stop. But it stretched. Lily stared at the man she had loved, hated, mourned, and missed, often all at once. The man who had left her, but who had also once rocked her to sleep. His hand was still extended. Not demanding. Not pleading. Just waiting. She didn't know what forgiveness looked like. But maybe it looked like this. A hand held out, with no assurance of being taken. She stepped forward. Just one pace. Then another. The bouquet shifted slightly in her grip. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just moved. When she reached him, she paused. For a breath. For a memory. Then, silently, she slipped her arm into his. It was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was just real. And it was everything. The whispers fell away. The quartet, sensing something sacred, began to play again, softly, reverently. The notes floated like light across the garden. William and Lily began to walk together, side by side, toward the altar. Her steps were steady. His were careful. The moment didn't erase anything, but it redrew the path forward. Not as it should have been, but as it was now. The aisle stretched ahead like a memory made visible. Guests watched in silence. Some wiped their eyes. Others placed hands over their hearts. No one clapped. No one whispered. This wasn't spectacle. This was reconciliation lived in real time. A daughter and father walking a path built from silence, stitched together by music. As they approached the altar, William glanced at Ethan, and Ethan nodded gently. No resentment, no competition. Just understanding. They weren't replacing anyone. They were standing beside each other for her. For love. For peace. Lily felt the strength in both of them. And in herself. When they reached the final step, William paused. He didn't need to be told what to do. He turned to Lily, their arms still linked. She looked at him fully now, for the first time in years. No words. Just eyes. Just breath. Just presence. He released her hand slowly and stepped back. His part was done. But not his place. He moved to the front row, where Margaret sat waiting. She looked up at him with something between pride and relief. He nodded once. She reached for his hand. The quartet continued to play as he sat, a quiet presence in the crowd. He didn't need the spotlight. Just this seat. Just this view. Just this daughter. At the altar, Lily turned fully to Ethan, who now stepped forward. They joined hands. The officiant welcomed the guests. The ceremony had begun. But what mattered most had already happened. And as the breeze moved gently through the garden, William exhaled, for the first time in years, not in regret, but in release. The music softened as the officiant stepped forward, a gentle smile on his face as he welcomed the guests. The air was still, reverent. At the altar, Lily and Ethan stood hand in hand, their fingers already trembling. The moment didn't feel like a performance, it felt like something ancient, something earned. Behind them, the flowers framed their silhouettes. In the front row, William sat motionless, his eyes fixed not just on his daughter, but on a life he had almost missed. The officiant spoke briefly about love, how it endures, forgives, rebuilds. But the words seemed distant. All attention was on the couple standing silently before them. Then he turned to Ethan, inviting him to speak his vows. Ethan cleared his throat. He looked at Lily, and for a moment, forgot the guests, the setting, the weight. I don't have perfect words, he began. But I know this, you make me better, and I'll spend my life doing the same for you. Ethan's voice wavered, but he kept going. You've taught me strength isn't volume. It's presence. It's staying when things get quiet. I promise to stand beside you in silence and in storm. To listen before I speak. To choose us, even when it's hard. Especially then. He took a breath. I don't just love who you are. I love how you fight to stay soft. And I will always protect that softness. A few guests wiped their eyes. Even the officiant blinked away emotion. Now it was Lily's turn. She hesitated for just a moment, then looked at Ethan. Really looked. Her voice was quiet, but steady. I never expected to find someone who wouldn't run from my silence, she began. Someone who saw my grief and didn't try to fix it, just held space beside it. I've loved you in pieces. I'll love you whole. I'll love you in every version of us we become. She paused. And I'll never walk away without leaving a light on. The moment hung suspended. The officiant nodded, satisfied, and turned to the guests. He asked for rings, which were passed forward with shaking hands. Ethan placed the band on Lily's finger with a whispered breath. She returned the gesture, her fingers cool against his skin. There was no grand proclamation, just a soft, with this ring, I choose you. Then came the final words, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. They kissed. Soft. Brief. But full of everything. The garden exhaled. The guests clapped, some standing, some still frozen in the beauty of what they'd witnessed. Margaret wiped the corner of her eye discreetly. William didn't move, but his gaze softened. The silence inside him was no longer empty. It was full. He had come late, but not too late. And that difference meant everything. After the ceremony, the garden shifted into celebration. A small reception followed beneath hanging lights and low music. Laughter returned. Glasses clinked. Plates were passed. Ethan and Lily mingled slowly, never letting go of each other's hand for long. Guests came and went, conversations rising like waves. But the center of it all remained them, and the stillness they carried inside the joy. In one quiet corner, William stood beside Margaret, watching from a respectful distance. "You did well," she said softly. He gave a short nod. "She did," he replied. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, she added, "You still have time. Maybe not to make it right, but to make what comes next better." He didn't answer. But he stayed. And that, for now, was enough. A gentle song began to play. The garden lights glowed warmer. Lily turned, scanning the space. Her eyes landed on William. She didn't speak, just walked toward him slowly. When she reached him, she extended her hand. "One dance," she said quietly. He hesitated for a breath, then took her hand. No one cheered. No one interrupted. They just watched something rare, grace unfolding. They danced slowly, not perfectly, but together. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. His hand rested near her back, careful, like holding something breakable. Around them, conversations faded. The music carried just enough to hold the moment in place. Neither spoke. There were no apologies, no explanations. Just presence. Just movement. Just two people who hadn't been this close in years. As the song ended, Lily stepped back. "Thank you," she said. William nodded, but didn't let go immediately. "I'm proud of you," he said at last, barely above a whisper. She smiled, small, but real. Then turned back toward Ethan, who waited near the table with 2 glasses of champagne. William watched her walk away, not as something lost, but as someone finding her way. William returned to his seat, exhaling as he sat. He looked up at the stars beginning to prick the sky above the garden. The ceremony was over. The vows were said. But in his chest, something was just beginning to settle. For years he had carried absence like armor. Now, it had cracked. And through it, something else was growing. Not redemption. Not yet. But the room for it. And sometimes, that's where healing starts. The next morning, the sky hung overcast but calm. William stood outside a small public school on the edge of town, hands in his coat pockets. The building was modest, aged brick, cracked paint, a mural of children holding instruments fading on one wall. He didn't plan to go inside. He just stood there, looking through the iron fence at the empty yard. It wasn't a grand gesture. He didn't believe in those anymore. But he needed to see what kind of place Ethan had poured himself into. The school was quiet. Weak in silence. A custodian walked by with a card and gave him a polite nod. William returned it with a glance, then turned his eyes to the classroom windows. Most were shut, curtains drawn. But one near the end was slightly open. Through it, he could see music stands, a chalkboard with faded notation, and posters tacked along the walls. Smiling children holding violins, flutes, hands raised. In one, Ethan stood beside them, grinning, sleeves rolled. He didn't need to go inside. The room itself told a story. On the door was a small bronze plaque, "Music Room," dedicated to Mr. Ethan. Below it, handwritten on colored paper, were dozens of notes. "Thank you for teaching me to believe in my voice. You made music feel like magic. You were my favorite part of school." Each one penned by a child's hand. Some misspelled. All heartfelt. William took a slow breath and looked down. He felt the weight of it then, not shame, exactly. Not regret alone. Something deeper. A realization. Ethan had done what he hadn't, stayed. Gave. Built something that remained even after he left. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't prestige. But it mattered. And, William felt, in that moment, both smaller and more certain than he had in years. He didn't need to say anything. He just needed to respond, in action. Later that afternoon, William sat in his office. The room, once imposing, felt different now. Quieter. He opened a folder, took out a check, and began writing. No signature line. No logo. Just a blank envelope and a line in the memo, "For music." For them. Alongside it, he slid a small note, "Use where it matters most." No credit needed. Then sealed it and addressed it to the school's director. The pen felt heavy in his hand, but honest. Back at home, he pulled a thin wooden box from his bookshelf, buried beneath old ledgers and sealed envelopes. Inside was sheet music. Original drafts of Lily's song, hand-notated with scribbles and tempo changes. Pages yellowed by time, but intact. On the first page, a note in his late wife's handwriting, "For a girl, when she needs to remember." His hands trembled as he closed the box again and tied it gently with a ribbon. That evening, he stood outside Lily and Ethan's apartment, the box wrapped in brown paper. He didn't text. He didn't call. He simply knocked and waited. Lily answered, hair pulled up, wearing a soft sweater and surprise on her face. They stood in the doorway for a moment, two people with history too long for small talk. Then, silently, she stepped aside. Let him in. They sat in the living room, tea steaming between them. Ethan entered quietly, offered a handshake, then left them alone. William handed her the box without a word. She untied the ribbon, lifted the lid. Inside, the pages rustled softly. She recognized the handwriting instantly. Her breath caught. I thought this was lost, she said quietly. I almost wanted it to be. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. She ran her fingers over the notations, the tiny margin notes. Mom always said it was your lullaby. But I never believed her. I thought it was hers. Her voice wavered, but she kept reading. On the last page, she found her mother's handwriting again. Just one line, he wrote it the night you were born. I just helped him remember. Lily closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were wet. I'm not sure what this means, Lily said at last, looking up. Her voice was steady, but quiet. But thank you. William nodded once. It means I should have come back sooner, he said. The first words he had spoken since arriving. She didn't answer. She just placed the box gently on the table and sat with her hands folded, letting silence speak for her. They didn't talk long. There wasn't much to say. Not yet. But when he stood to leave, she didn't stop him. She didn't ask him to stay. But as he reached the door, she added softly, You kept this safe all these years? He paused. It was the only thing I did. Then he opened the door and left, coat trailing behind him in the evening breeze. After he was gone, Lily returned to the music box and opened it again. She lifted the final page, held it in her lap, and let her fingers trace the faded ink. A song once meant for comfort had become a bridge. Not enough to cross everything, but maybe enough to begin. Outside, wind stirred through the trees. And somewhere in the quiet, she could almost hear it again, the melody that still remembered her name. The knock at the door came mid-afternoon. No warning, no message ahead. Just 3 slow taps. Lily opened it to find William standing there, a familiar worn satchel in one hand, and a quiet expression on his face. Thought I'd return something, he said, eyes flicking behind her to the apartment's soft lighting and the smell of cinnamon in the air. She stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in without ceremony. Ethan greeted him with a quiet nod from the kitchen. The living room was warm and lived in. Framed photos lined a shelf, and a half-finished mug of tea rested on the piano bench. William sat carefully, setting the satchel on the coffee table. This has been in my office since you were a teenager, he said, opening it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, pages browned at the edges. I wrote things. Most of them I never finished. Lily leaned forward, her eyes drawn to the faded edges of the cover. They moved to the dining table, Ethan placing mugs before them. Lily opened the journal gently. Inside, page after page revealed musical notations, incomplete lyrics, small doodles, some of them clearly drawn by a child's hand. On one, a verse titled Lily's Song, Draft 2 sat alongside a crooked heart and a stick figure with curly hair. William gave a soft laugh. You added that part when you were 6. Said the original wasn't happy enough. Lily traced the lines with her fingertip, expression unreadable. I don't remember doing that, she murmured. But I remember wanting to. Ethan stayed quiet, his hand resting gently on her back. There's a lot in here, William said. Half thoughts, fragments, things I never had the courage to finish. I thought. Maybe one day, someone else might. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Lily turned another page. A line written in her father's handwriting read, If one day she writes too, I'll know I did something right. Her fingers stopped there. The room grew still. William looked down at his tea, voice quieter now. I didn't know, he said. Back then. What I was leaving behind. Or what you'd carry forward. He looked up, meeting her eyes. But I hoped. Maybe. This could still mean something. She nodded, eyes glossy. It does, she said simply. Not because of what it was. But because of what you kept. He exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something heavier than air. Ethan stood and excused himself softly, leaving them in the warm silence. Lily flipped to the back of the journal and pulled a folded sheet from her pocket. "I've been working on something. I didn't know how to finish it." She handed him the paper. On it, a melody sketched in pencil, lyrics half-formed. It was raw, but familiar. The structure carried echoes of Lily's song but changed. Grown. "I've rewritten it more times than I can count," she said. "But I never got past the second verse." He studied the page, then looked back at her. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's unfinished," she replied. "So was yours." A pause stretched between them, not awkward, but full. "I don't know if it's a lullaby or a prayer," Lily said. "But it's for someone small. Someone I haven't met yet." William blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Lily," he began, but stopped. Her smile was small, but real. "We're not telling many people yet. Still early." He absorbed it slowly, his eyes widening not in shock, but in awe. He leaned back in his chair, as if the world had shifted subtly beneath him. "So this is for them?" he asked. "Eventually," she nodded. "But I wanted you to see it first. Before it had a name. Before it became a memory." He touched the page again. "Then maybe we finish it together." The words came softer than expected, but firm. She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. They sat side by side on the couch, the journal open between them. William pointed to a line and offered a small change. She countered with another. They laughed once, light and unexpected. Outside, the light began to shift toward evening. Time passed gently, unmeasured, like a song with no bridge. No one talked about what had been lost. Only what could now be written. Ethan returned with a blanket and placed it on the back of the couch. "I'll leave you two to it," he said, pressing a kiss to Lily's hair. She leaned into him briefly, then turned back to the page. William held the pencil between his fingers, not writing yet, just holding it. She offered the journal to him, spine open. "Go ahead," she said. "Write the next line." He hesitated, then began. As he wrote, Lily watched his hand move across the page. She rested her own hand lightly on her stomach, invisible to anyone else, but now real in the quiet. The song would grow. The family would too. And maybe the past couldn't be rewritten, but the music? That was still theirs to finish. When he handed the journal back, she smiled. "It's a start." He smiled too. Finally, the morning was quiet, sun breaking gently through pale clouds as William walked along a path that wound through the park. He didn't rush. His steps were steady, deliberate. Trees swayed above him, birds flitted between branches. He passed a pond, a bench where an elderly couple sat, a woman jogging with headphones. Life moved around him, not waiting, not watching, just existing. And for once, he didn't feel separate from it. He was part of the rhythm. Finally, as he approached the far end of the park, a sound caught his attention, faint at first, then unmistakable. A violin. Off-key, uneven, clearly a student. But the melody it played made his feet stop mid-step. His breath caught. It was Lily's song. Slower, less precise, but there. He followed the sound, drawn to it like a thread pulling him towards something invisible and vital. The child finished and looked up briefly, unaware of the man watching from the path. William smiled. A real smile. Not the one he wore for meetings, or holidays, or obligation. This one was born from something quieter, recognition. Legacy. The idea that music, like love, doesn't need permission to continue. It simply finds new fingers, new hearts. He placed a hand on his chest, not for pain, but for wonder. Later, at home, William sat at the piano for the first time in months. The bench creaked under his weight. He lifted the lid, fingers hovering above ivory keys. No audience. No deadlines. No one waiting. He began to play, not the old way, with technical precision and self-imposed rules, but with breath. The melody came softer, fuller. Lily's song, yes, but now with variations. Space. Forgiveness. The music filled the house. Sunlight moved across the rug as the notes wandered gently into the air. On the mantel sat the leather journal. Lily had returned to him. Open to a blank page. A pencil resting across it. As if waiting. But he didn't rush to write. Today was for playing. For feeling. For remembering without regret. For adding, not correcting. For finally being present inside the music again. Across town, Lily sat in the nursery, her newborn swaddled in soft cloth, eyes closed, lips parted in dream. Ethan stood behind her, arms resting on her shoulders. The window was open. Wind stirred the curtains, carrying in the faint hum of life outside. Lily hummed under her breath, no words, just a familiar melody. Their melody. Her hand rested lightly on her daughter's chest, rising and falling in rhythm. On the dresser, a small speaker played the same tune William had been playing at home. The music crossed space without effort. Across generations. Across histories. It wasn't just Lily's song anymore. It had changed, slower in some places, brighter in others. Like the family itself. Built on pieces. Woven through silence. Alive now, in a room filled with lullabies and second chances. The doorbell rang gently, and Lily rose to answer. William stood outside holding a small stuffed animal, unsure if it was appropriate, unsure if it mattered. She opened the door and smiled. "Come in, Grandpa." The words were simple, but they held weight. He stepped inside, slowly, quietly. The house smelled of cinnamon and warm milk. He followed her to the nursery without speaking. Ethan greeted him with a nod and stepped aside. The nursery was dim, soft light pouring in. William looked down into the crib. His granddaughter blinked once, then yawned. Tiny fingers stretched in sleep. He reached down slowly, and Lily lifted the baby into his arms. She fit there as if she'd always belonged. As if every silence in his past had been waiting for this soundless moment. He sat in the rocking chair. The baby nestled into his chest. Lily sat beside him. Ethan crouched nearby, hand resting on her knee. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the music still playing. William looked at the child, at the curve of her nose, the weight of her breath. "She has your eyes," he said quietly. Lily nodded. "And your song." The afternoon passed unnoticed. The world outside moved on, unaware of what had finally settled in one quiet room. William handed the baby back and stood slowly, his knees aching a little more than usual. But his heart didn't. He hugged Lily, held Ethan's shoulder a beat longer than expected, then turned to the door. "Same time next week?" Lily asked with a smirk. He laughed. "Count on it." That night, William returned home. The house wasn't quiet. It was calm. He sat at the piano again, opened the journal, and began to write, not notes, not lyrics. Just a line at the top of the page: "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we pass on." He closed the book. Then, with a sigh full of peace, he placed his hands on the keys and let the music play him home. Sometimes, it takes a lifetime to understand the quiet ways we are loved. Not through grand gestures, but through songs that stay. Through hands that one day return. Through children who hum melodies they never learned, because they were born remembering. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. What legacy would you want to pass on? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where faith and family find their way back, one note at a time.